Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing amazing. We're going to watch how Caesar won the Great Civil War. Now, we already watched a beginning parts of how he crossed the Rubicon, the initial, fighting and going back and forth in Iberia. Now, let's continue. Glad you're here with me. Make sure you hit that like button. We're going to start with the intro as well as the Siege of Alexandria. Kings and generals. No one does it better.
In the previous episode, we talked about the beginning of the Great Roman Civil War. This first phase was underlined by the conflict between Caesar and Pompey, two former allies who became mortal enemies. The winner was decided during the last battle, Pharsalus. Pompey was defeated, but that wasn't the end of the war, as Caesar had to contend with the remainder of the Optimate Party and external enemies. Welcome to the second episode on Caesar's Civil War. These long videos are very difficult to make, so consider liking, sharing, and commenting. Throughout Caesar's campaigns in Greece, he had continued to levy legions elsewhere, adding the 31st, 32nd, and 33rd to his ranks. Following the Battle of Pharsalus, he also inducted some of Pompey's surrendered men into his army, making the 34th, 35th, 36th, and 37th legions.
I mean, Caesar's the most powerful person to ever live at this point, right?
Caesar, by this stage of the war, now had the numerical advantage, but the Optimate faction still harbored some of the most influential politicians of the day. The war was far from over. Caesar's first priority after the Battle of Pharsalus was Pompey himself. He immediately left in pursuit, leaving Antony to oversee the political situation in Rome. It was the time of year where the elections for next year's consul would usually be decided, and Caesar's term as consul of the year 48 BC would be coming to an end.
And where are all the senators at? Obviously, are they in Athens? Where are the senators? Are they in Rome? Are they in Campania? Where did they go at this point? I know a lot of the Optimates fled with Pompey to Greece, but I don't know where they're at now.
Caesar would entrust Antony with ensuring that his political power continued. Having picked up on Pompey's trail through informants in Asia Minor, Caesar pursued Pompey to Egypt with a fleet of 10 Rhodian ships, as well as a few more from Asia Minor. On board were 2 legions, the 6th and 27th, totaling just around 3,200 infantry, as many soldiers as had been lost to war and illness over the years, and 800 cavalry. Caesar only learned of his ex-triumvir's death upon his arrival in Alexandria at the start of October 48 BC, just a few days after Pompey's death. According to Plutarch and Cassius Dio, when Caesar was first presented with Pompey's head, he turned away disgusted. He was next presented.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is somebody he knew. This is like someone he called a brother and someone he called a friend. It just recently had this issue, so like, yeah, that's probably devastating to see that, even though there was hardships.
The seal ring of Pompey, at which point Caesar broke down in tears. Both historians interpret this grief differently. Plutarch claims that it was genuine. After all, though enemies in later life, Caesar and Pompey had been political allies for around 8 years, had effectively ruled Rome together, and had even been related by marriage. Dio, on the other hand, claims that this grief was only for show, and that Caesar had always hated Pompey from the start. It is impossible to say which is true. However, it is likely that
I think it was genuine.
Caesar was incredibly frustrated at Pompey's death. Caesar had a genius for public relations, capturing Pompey, forcing him to renounce the Senate, and then pardoning him, as was Caesar's habit, would have been the ultimate coup de grace. Instead, Pompey's assassination made him a martyr for the Optimate cause, something Caesar would have surely wished to avoid.
Yeah, I guess there's a strategical side of that I'm not thinking about.
In Rome, however, Antony was able to capitalize on news of Pompey's death. Many in Rome had refused to believe that Pompey had been defeated, but upon being presented with Pompey's ring, which Caesar had sent to Rome, They finally accepted that the old general was lost and was dead. Rome
How old was Pompey on his death?
now acclaimed Caesar as the victor, bestowing countless honors on him. Seizing upon the situation, Antony labeled the Pompeians in Africa as conspirators, declared a national emergency, and that a dictator was needed. The man chosen to be dictator was, of course, Caesar.
Who else?
Rather than the regular 6 months, his term as dictator was also set at 1 year, running through October 47 BC. In return for his continued loyalty and effectiveness, Antony was named by Caesar as Master of Horse, effectively his second in command.
Which is a very ancient title that has continued to that time.
And was entrusted with the governance of Italy and Rome in Caesar's absence. Many Optimate politicians, such as Gaius Cassius, now returned to Rome and appealed for forgiveness from Caesar. All were spared and welcomed into the new regime.
Cicero's like, yeah, I'm coming back.
Cicero also returned to Rome and was forgiven.
Yeah.
He returned to the Senate, where he hoped to use his influence to do what he could to preserve the Republic.
Where's Cato at this point?
With Caesar in Egypt now being a dictator, he decided to turn his attention to Roman interests in the area, namely the rulership of the kingdom and its debt to Rome. As we have seen, Egypt was ruled by the boy pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. The pharaoh's father, Ptolemy XII, had made an alliance with Rome during Caesar's tenure as consul in 60 BC. Before his death, Ptolemy XII named his eldest son, Ptolemy XIII, and his eldest daughter, Cleopatra VII, as co-rulers, with Rome as the guarantor of the will. Tensions between the two sibling rulers quickly escalated, however, both raising armies against each other.
Really?
Furthermore, both had inherited the debts of their father. Ptolemy XII had borrowed huge sums of money from Rome throughout his life, and by his death, there was still an unpaid debt of 17.5 million drachmae to the Republic.
So, yeah, so you got an Egyptian civil war happening at the same time as the, or maybe a little bit prior to the Roman civil war between Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra. I don't know anything about that really, besides the face value of that. So interesting. And Cleopatra, obviously, I'm not sure where she's at. Is that Memphis or is that like, it's down, that's definitely upriver. I'm not sure where that is.
Which constituted approximately half of Egypt's yearly revenue. Caesar was badly in need of money to pay his growing armies, and also saw an opportunity to solidify Roman influence in the area. As consul when the alliance with Egypt was first made, and the current dictator, Caesar thought it his obligation to see that pro-Roman rule in Egypt was maintained and that the debt was paid. Caesar first attempted to take a diplomatic approach, suggesting that Ptolemy and Cleopatra both disband their armies and that he act as an arbitrator to see their father's will fulfilled. He also requested the debt be paid, but was willing to reduce it to 10 million drachmae. Ptolemy, though pharaoh by title, was still young, and as such, was being advised by a council who effectively ruled Egypt through their regency.
Makes sense. I mean, you wouldn't want a kid to rule your country.
Pothinus, a eunuch, was one of the most influential of these advisors. It had been on his advice that Pompey had been assassinated as a ploy to curry favor with Caesar. Now he opposed Caesar's suggestions. He saw Caesar's arrival as a threat to royal authority, and initially refused to pay the debt. He even went so far as to bring Ptolemy's royal army into Alexandria under the command of Achilles, one of Pompey's killers. This was clear defiance of Caesar's demands that Ptolemy's armies be disbanded, and in response, Caesar sent messengers to Cleopatra, perhaps thinking she would be able to better fulfill his demands without requiring a regent.
Cleopatra's not in charge, though. That's the interesting part. Like, that's very interesting.
Cleopatra decided to meet Caesar in secret within Alexandria. Plutarch gives an extraordinary account of this meeting, in which Cleopatra, with the help of her right-hand man Apollodorus, smuggles herself into the city in a bed sack, laundry bag, or carpet. Cassius Dio gives the much more reasonable account that the two simply met in secret with no reference to her being smuggled in. Both sources, however, agree that Cleopatra was quickly able to seduce Caesar. Cleopatra is described as being beautiful, charming, and above all, clever. She was a brilliant orator and could speak as many as 8 languages, and was the first Ptolemaic ruler to learn
8 languages. Wow.
Egyptian. Caesar immediately tried to reconcile the two monarchs, proclaiming them co-monarchs, and offering the island of Cyprus, recently annexed from the Egyptians by Rome, to the other two siblings, Arsinoe and Ptolemy XIV, thus removing other potential claimants to the Egyptian throne. Pothinus, however, was not happy with this agreement. He was worried that, due to Cleopatra's now very close relationship with Caesar, she would be the more powerful of the two siblings, and that Pothinus would, as a result, lose his influence.
Boo-hoo.
He began stirring up unrest in the city, even having gold from the temples and royal treasury melted down in a deliberate attempt to show Caesar as being extortionate. With the situation worsening, Caesar sent emissaries to Achilles and the Egyptian army, attempting to explain that he only wanted to be an arbitrator of the will, as was his legal right. These emissaries were killed on Achilles' orders.
Dang!
The message was clear: a fight was imminent. Caesar was aware that he did not have enough men to fight in the open, only having the 4,000 he had brought from Greece. Instead, he ordered his men to seize the royal quarters where he had been housed. Within these quarters were Cleopatra, Pothinus, Arsinoe, and the boy pharaoh Ptolemy himself.
Yeah, no, I've seen a little bit of this already through his story Civilis' telling, where Caesar's going to come to a near-death experience in the water, and there's going to be, a fire, and there's just going to be, it's just going to be under siege. This area, specifically the royal quarters, is going to be under siege by the royal army. I'm not sure what happens to Ptolemy XIII, but I think something might happen. But nevertheless, this is very, very edgy situation for Caesar.
Having taken control of the pharaoh, Caesar awaited Achilles' next move. Achilles' army numbered around 20,000, plus a further 2,000 cavalry, all experienced veterans.
You're not beating that.
Their numbers were swelled still further by the rioting Alexandrian citizens and even slaves, who aligned with the army and took up arms, making a kind of militia.
Yeah, they have propagandized that their sovereignty is under threat, which sorta like the underlyingness is, but on face value, no, it's not at all.
Things were descending into chaos, and Caesar was forced to begin further fortifying his position, and to send messengers to allies and his forces in Asia Minor requesting reinforcements. What had started as a simple political mission had now devolved into a siege. Achilles' army occupied the majority of the city to the west, including the Eunostos harbour, while Caesar only held the royal quarters and the royal harbour. Achilles regularly attacked Caesar's position, probing for weaknesses, but the narrow streets helped mitigate the difference in numbers.
Bottlenecks are your friend when you don't have the numbers.
Caesar's men consistently repulsing these attacks. Achilles next turned his attention to the great harbour, where both the Egyptian fleet and Caesar's fleet lay at anchor. If Achilles could seize this harbour and the ships, he would be able to cut off any chance of Caesar being resupplied or receiving reinforcements. Sending a diversionary force to attack Caesar's defences, Achilles simultaneously sent a larger force to seize the harbour. Caesar was well aware of the strategic value of the harbour, and so, leaving as small a force as was necessary to hold the defences, he led his men to the harbour.
That was amazing tactical shift right there by Caesar.
The fighting around the harbour was particularly brutal, and Caesar quickly realised he did not have enough men to win this fight and defend the harbour. Instead, Caesar effectively fought a delaying action, holding off the Egyptian force long enough for his men to set fire to the Egyptian fleet and pull their own fleet back to the royal harbour.
Wow.
The fire was ferocious and spread quickly.
And this is partly a fire that may or may not have inflicted some damage to the Library of Alexandria, but it was a shadow of its former self, obviously.
Partially burning the Great Library of Alexandria. The damage was relatively minor, fortunately, and the library would continue for a number of centuries afterwards.
Yeah, really, not really, but yeah.
Seizing the opportunity of having naval supremacy, Caesar sailed a portion of his men to the island of Pharos, which controlled access to all Alexandria's harbours, establishing a small garrison there, likely around the promenade on which the lighthouse itself was situated. Caesar and the rest of his forces then retreated back to the royal quarters. While Caesar persisted in improving his defences, Pothinus continued his resistance from the inside. Secretly, he sent messages to Achilles encouraging him to continue his attacks and plotted to assassinate Caesar.
So you just gotta take out that guy at that point.
Caesar's men, however, were able to catch some of Pothinus's messengers, who were forced to reveal the plot. Caesar immediately had Pothinus killed. Arsinoe, Ptolemy's sister, had greater success, escaping Caesar's defences and joining Achilles. Following this, an uneasy status quo developed. Caesar continued to fortify his position against any assaults, even making makeshift battering rams to break down the walls of houses to keep a continuous line of defense. The Alexandrians also constructed their own barricades to keep Caesar penned in, some as high as 12 meters. Achilles frequently sent some of his militia forces to assault various points of Caesar's defenses to look for weakness, keeping his veterans in reserve, but with little success. Perhaps frustrated by this,
I'm not sure how long it's gone on at this point, but I'm wondering.
Lack of success, a rift began to form between Arsinoe and Achilles, and eventually Arsinoe had Achilles killed and replaced by her own man, Ganymedes.
Wow.
Ganymedes was a cunning general and immediately took steps to try and break the stalemate. Alexandria was supplied by subterranean watercourses that ran throughout the city. Ganymedes, therefore, ordered that those sections that flowed into the parts of the city controlled by Caesar be blocked, and
smart, so the siege is actually underway.
Then had these sections polluted with seawater, rendering them undrinkable.
Yuck.
Such a tactic would have been difficult to pull off, but the Alexandrians were renowned engineers and were quickly
if you have a map and you just know where each gateway is, yeah, that's not that hard.
Able to complete the project, thus making Caesar's position even more precarious. Some of Caesar's men started to panic, some saying that they should have retreated much earlier. Fortunately for them, Caesar took control of the situation. He made it clear that if they were to attempt to retreat, the Alexandrians would catch them before they could successfully evacuate everyone. He instead ordered wells to be dug day and night, and fresh water was soon found, avoiding disaster.
Smart.
Though the situation had been quickly rectified, it was clear that Ganymedes was a dangerous enemy, not to be taken lightly. As time passed, Caesar's situation in Alexandria improved. His lieutenant in Asia Minor, Domitius Calvinus, had received Caesar's request for reinforcements and had responded by dispatching 2 legions,
one by land, one by sea. What is this, Agrippa and Augustus?
The 37th by sea and the 35th by land. The 35th was still far from reaching Egypt, but the 37th had now arrived. Strong winds had prevented them pulling into Alexandria's harbour, instead making landfall further down the coast and sending a small boat to inform Caesar of their arrival. Caesar badly needed these men, and so, leaving all his infantry to hold their positions in Alexandria, he left with his fleet and their respective crews to meet the 37th. En route, He dispatched small parties to collect what water they could, but these were attacked by Egyptian cavalry patrols and captured. The Egyptians, thus finding out Caesar's position, manned a number of small vessels with their infantry, hoping to catch Caesar separated from his legions. Caesar was not eager for battle. He needed all his ships for the 37th, and with no infantry or marines on his ships, the Egyptians would have the advantage in boarding. He tried to slip away.
Dang, he's caught.
A Rhodian ship, however, drifted too far from the formation and was caught by the Egyptians, forcing Caesar to turn to rescue them. Caesar, in his account, is rather damning of these Rhodians for being caught, but also notes that they fought bravely with remarkable seamanship. They were able to buy enough time for the rest of Caesar's fleet to close in. With no heavy infantry to carry out the customary Roman tactic of boarding an enemy, Caesar trusted his crew's seamanship to ram and cripple as many ships as possible while avoiding boarding.
Gosh, what a risk.
The plan worked, and the superior ships of Caesar's fleets were able to sink one ship and capture another. With night closing in, the Egyptians gave up the battle and retreated. Caesar was able to continue to the 37th, adding a much-needed 5,000 men to his numbers, towing their transports into harbour and arriving back in Alexandria the following morning. The Alexandrians were disheartened by this reversal, but Ganymedes was resilient and decided that he needed to rob Caesar of his naval capacity. More than 100 ships had been burnt by Caesar in the harbour, but not all were beyond repair. He ordered the Alexandrians to make repairs on as many ships as possible. The citizens and soldiers of Alexandria committed wholly to the task, even going so far as to pull wood from the buildings of Alexandria to suit their needs.
I mean, at this point, like, there's only one mission, and it is get Caesar.
After just a few days, Ganymedes had a fleet of 27 warships and a number of small ships ready for duty and prepared for battle. Caesar was well aware of the importance of naval supremacy and also began drawing up his fleet, approximately 19 warships and 15 smaller vessels, manning them with infantry from the legions. With Caesar setting off from the royal harbour and Ganymedes from the Eunostos,
Gosh, this is such a risk.
the two fleets met just off the coast of Pharos Island. Caesar and Ganymedes both drew their fleets into two lines. Between the two fleets were shoals, with a narrow channel being the only path through. Both sides held their position, neither wanting to be caught being the first to pass through this channel. Eventually, the Rhodian commander, Euphranor, a skilled and well-known admiral, offered to break the stalemate. He insisted that he and his men would be able to push through and hold for long enough for Caesar's remaining ships to pass through the channel. Caesar allowed this, sending Euphranor with 4 Rhodian ships through the channel. They quickly passed through and formed a line to receive the Egyptian ships rapidly closing in, delaying long enough for the rest of Caesar's ships to make it through the channel. Caesar was extremely admiring of the Rhodians' skill and bravery, saying that not one ship was boarded or had its oars broken, each time meeting their enemy head-on.
Wow. Good seamanship.
With Caesar's fleet now through the channel, he was fully committed. The channel would block any chance of an organized retreat. Caesar would need a win. Caesar had made this clear to his men prior to the battle, stressing that the fate of the Egyptian campaign,
the fate of the Roman world, actually,
rested on their soldiers. Though the Alexandrians were renowned sailors, the Romans did have a crucial advantage. The coast and shoals meant there was little room to maneuver, not only negating Ganymedes' numerical advantage, but also preventing his men from capitalizing on their superior seamanship. Instead, the ships were forced into...
It would make sense if they could muster flaming arrows. That would make so much sense in naval warfare. Let me know if that's happened in this ancient time, but it would seem that some sort of I don't know how it would be done, but flaming arrow mechanics would have been an advantage, a high advantage.
Close quarters combat, with numerous boarding parties. This was the style of naval warfare the Romans excelled at, effectively making a naval battle a land battle where the superior skill and training of the legions could truly come into its own. By the end of the battle, 2 Egyptian ships had been captured, 3 sunk, and the remnants being forced to retreat back to harbour.
I mean, at this point, Caesar's just getting exactly what he wants. At this point.
Seeking to capitalize on his naval supremacy, Caesar immediately turned his attention to Pharos Island. The island was crucial for controlling access into the harbours and was linked to the mainland by a bridge which connected 2 moles, one extending from the island, one from the mainland. As has already been mentioned, Caesar had already stationed a small garrison on the promenade on the east of the island, and now he saw a chance to completely control Pharos Island, leaving just a few cohorts to hold the now completed defences in the city. Caesar ordered 10 cohorts, approximately 5,000 men, some light infantry, and his best Gallic cavalry to their transports to prepare for an amphibious assault. He then ordered them to attack, at the same time attacking the island's garrison with his warships from
This is masterclass so far.
the west. The fighting on the island was some of the bloodiest so far. The narrow streets and rooftops were ideal for the defenders, while Caesar's men disembarking from the ships were forced to wade through shallow waters and across a beach under constant missile fire. Caesar's tactic of attacking from 2 sides had been effective in splitting the island's defenders, however, and finally the Romans were able to force the Alexandrians to retreat across the mole back to Alexandria.
Wow.
The retreat was not organized, many choosing to jump from the bridge and mole and swim to Alexandria rather than be caught in the bottleneck. Caesar gives the Alexandrian losses as being 6,000 captured and killed. Following this victory, Caesar fortified defences around the bridge controlling access to the Pharos, the Alexandrians garrisoning the bridge linking the mainland city to the mole. This bridge had a large arc through which the Alexandrians could potentially send ships. In order to stop the Egyptians being able to harass his own ships, Caesar would need to control this bridge. The day after taking the island, he first sent ships with artillery and archers to attack the Alexandrian garrison holding the bridge, forcing them to retreat, and then landed himself and 3 cohorts, about 1,500 men, on the mole. These men were then ordered to build a rampart to defend the bridge from the Alexandrian side, while men from the Pharos brought up stones from destroyed buildings to block the arch of the bridge. All seemed to be going well when the Alexandrians suddenly made a huge push from the city to retake
This is where it gets dangerous, though.
the bridge, simultaneously bringing up light ships to try and land some of their own men on the mole. With Caesar on the mole, some of his ships tried to take the initiative themselves, landing marines, slingers, and archers. Initially, these missiles were effective at fending off the Alexandrian light ships, but eventually the ships bypassed their position, landing behind them on the mole. These lightly armed troops were quickly outfought by the Alexandrians, and panic ensued as they attempted to retreat back to their ships. Caesar and the 3 cohorts were now caught in a pincer. Seeing their allied light infantry in disarray, the cohorts also began to break. Some fought a desperate last stand and were cut down. Many more desperately tried to retreat to their transports. Among these was Caesar. Due to the sheer number and panic, however, many of these transports began to capsize.
Jeez.
Thinking fast, Caesar was forced to strip his armor and dive off the boat, swimming to his nearby ships to save his life.
That was, near-death experience right there for everything.
The battle had been a disaster for Caesar. Though Pharos Island was in Caesar's hands, the bridge was not, and so the Alexandrians could still use the arch to harass his own ships. Moreover, according to Caesar himself, he lost 400 legionnaires and another 400 sailors and marines.
A lot.
Seeking to capitalize on their good fortune, the Alexandrians sent emissaries to Caesar, requesting Ptolemy be returned to them in exchange for an end to the hostilities. Caesar relented and handed the pharaoh over, with the understanding that Ptolemy would then negotiate peace terms. The young king betrayed Caesar, however, and took control of the army, continuing the assaults on Caesar's defences. The decision to hand over Ptolemy was clearly a mistake. In his own account, Caesar relays how his own officers and centurions...
I mean, if you think about it, like, look, the Ptolemy and Cleopatra were at, like, disagreements way before this, and then he's a boy. His council was against Caesar, and you killed his council. Like, this is not a good look. Not a good look for Caesar in this case.
Strongly criticized him for his lack of judgment and trust in the king.
Yeah.
Caesar attempts to justify his decision, claiming it was part of a far-sighted strategy which his men did not understand, and that Ptolemy had cried and begged Caesar to let him stay. This seems a clear point where Caesar was using his narrative to try and revise the events and put a positive spin on things. It is far more likely, given Caesar's situation, that he was grasping at straws by letting Ptolemy go, and judging by how much Caesar attempts to mask this, he was well aware that he had made a mistake. Nevertheless, roughly a month later, around the end of February or start of March, Caesar's fortunes began to turn. His allies in Asia Minor had been rallying a force together and marching through Syria and the Levant to Egypt.
Remember that he sent one by sea, one by land. So one by land is what we're talking about now.
While supplies were being sent by ship to Caesar. Word of this had already reached the Alexandrians, however, who sent a fleet to intercept the supplies. As soon as Caesar heard of this, he sent his own ships, commanded by Tiberius Nero and Euphranor, to defend his allies' supply ships. Though the Romans were able to win the battle, Euphranor's ship was surrounded and the Rhodian was killed. The army was also seeing success. The force was around 13,000 strong and commanded by Mithridates of Pergamum, an experienced, talented general and close friend of Caesar. He had now made it to the Nile Delta, having already stormed and seized the strategically important town of Pelusium. An Egyptian force was hastily gathered and sent to attack Mithridates at the river, hoping to either destroy his army or at the very least prevent him from reaching Alexandria and supporting Caesar. Mithridates had been well trained in the Roman style of warfare, however, and skillfully fortified his position, holding the Egyptians in check and inflicting heavy casualties as he did so. Messengers were sent to both Caesar and Ptolemy of these events, both learning of them around the same time. Ptolemy knew Mithridates had to be crushed, or else risk Mithridates attacking his force in Alexandria.
Yeah, there would be no way you would be able to stop them if that happened. Oh, it looks like, yeah. Looks like that's where we'll stop though. On this day. We've gotten through almost half an hour of the Great Roman Civil War. It's interesting though. You know, the contrast between Ptolemy and Cleopatra, and then of course Cleopatra and Caesar being very much aligned in the tactics here. Ptolemy's now against the Romans, and we'll see what happens with that. But now you got Mithridates really encroaching on Alexandria itself through the Nile River Delta. You don't really have much hope for the Alexandrian or the Ptolemaic. How would I say it? The Ptolemy side, you really don't have a lot of hope for them in this case, given, you know, the Roman strength, their tactics, their ability to win, especially, you know, a lot of these veterans that are with Caesar. It's just it's not going to look good. But they've held their own so far. Give it. It's been a siege, so we'll see what happens next time. I appreciate you guys being here as always. Leave me some video suggestions down below. I'll catch you. Bye-bye, and peace out.